some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. They were a killing team. By the end of their run, it was estimated they had killed 135 men. They would hunt together, stalking, watching, waiting until the perfect moment to strike their prey. They seemed invisible. At times their prey could hear them breathing, but couldn't see them, not even if they were sitting right next to them. Eventually traps would be set up to stop them, but somehow the pair got wind of the plans and managed to delay a planned killing or just choose another locale. They were quick, they were methodical, they were efficient. At one point, as many as 125 professional trackers were on the case, and still the pair found a way to elude capture and kill again. They were hard to figure out, though. The usual motives ascribed to serial killers weren't applicable here. It wasn't about money or sex. Power, on the other hand, well, that's a question mark. Maybe they just wanted to show that they were still there, in charge of this part of the world. The reign of terror lasted 9 months. They were a scourge unlike any previously seen in these parts. They were bloodthirsty, and they were relentless and unafraid. They were inhuman. No, really, they were lions, and they were legendary. According to the British weekly magazine The Spectator, reporting in March 1900, quote, "And the whole body of lion anecdote from the days of the Assyrian kings till the last year of the 19th century were collated and brought together, it would not equal in tragedy or atrocity, in savageness or in sheer insolent contempt for man, armed or unarmed, white or black, the story of these two beasts." End quote. Let me take a minute here to say that this isn't going to be your ordinary crime of the 19th century, because, well, animals can't commit crimes, though there is little doubt that they can and do form intent, and they can plan and they can execute a plan as well, if not better, than most humans. But they can't be convicted of wrongdoing, only stopped from doing it. This story, though, had me spending some time asking myself if what they were doing was wrong in the first place. British colonists were building a railway across a vast African plain, land which they had taken from those who lived there, and as such, were treading on the lions' land who did the only thing they knew how to do, to protest. It would work for a while, and it'd be all kinds of ugly. Still, if after you've heard their story you want to blame them, you can, but I know a lot of people who wouldn't. Crime among humans is sometimes that way too. It may be justified, even fair. Think Robin Hood. But when innocent people die, accountability seems to be required. Ian Allen, a safari guide in Tsavo for 4 decades, talking in an episode of Great Safaris about the lions in question here.
Their habits are different, the way they deal with their environment is totally different. They're not the kind of lions where you're going to drive up to them and see them lying on their back with their paws in the air like we can in the Mara or the Serengeti. These lions are out there and they're working hard. They're killers. They're machines, killing machines.
Killing machines. That sounds bad. But is it? This time, listener, you get to decide who or what should bear responsibility for the unnatural deaths at the center of this case. That is, the deaths of 135 men who were just working for a living in a hard land that was not their own. Crimes This Centuries is sponsored by Laundry Sauce. I love that Laundry Sauce has returned as a sponsor because when they re-upped, they sent me more product and I already buy this stuff on my own, so now I'm fully stocked in the laundry care department. I have never liked scented laundry detergent or fabric softeners, so this is a big deal for me to become so loyal to a brand. Laundry Sauce created the world's best-smelling laundry detergent in simple-to-use, high-performance pods. They have transformed the mundane task of me doing my laundry into a luxurious experience. I don't dread laundry day anymore. It's actually a treat to pull out fresh clothes that smell like Egyptian rose. That's my scent and I'm sticking to it. If it's not your bag, maybe you'll love Australian sandalwood or cyber pine. And it's not just detergent pods. Laundry Sauce makes scent boosters, dryer sheets, dryer balls, and fabric softeners too. Elevate your laundry with Laundry Sauce. Now is the time to experience Laundry Sauce. Head to laundrysauce.com/COTC and use my code COTC at checkout for 15% off. That's the best offer you'll find, but you must use my code COTC for 15% off your order. One last time, that's laundrysauce.com/COTC, promo code COTC for 15% off. Stay with me as I offer a small, very small, history lesson to get us rolling. African safari guide David Boitron boiled it down for us.
I think what happened, the Tsavo incident, was a really remarkable story of a conflict between man and beast at a time when the wilderness sort of had the upper hand.
He's talking about the late 19th century, and despite the fact that wilderness still has the upper hand in a lot of the world, this is when almost all of Africa remained untouched and untamed by Western standards. It was a century earlier, in 1793, that the British forced the Dutch out of South Africa. It had diamonds, among other things, that everybody wanted. Then, as all of Europe salivated for the region's goodies, Britain really got busy and pushed north and east up the African coast, gaining much of their territory by European agreement as the century wore on. The geopolitical advantage of controlling East Africa was clear. Not only was the area rich in rubber and ivory and cocoa and tea, but also because the ports, when made safe, were good stopover points as British ships sailed to its empire in India via the Indian Ocean and on to Asia. Construction of the Ugandan Railway began on Africa's east coast in the port city of Mombasa in British East Africa in 1896. It was completed 5 years later at the eastern shore of Lake Victoria. It was, essentially, an effort to open up the interior of Kenya and make sure the Germans didn't lay claim to any of it in the meantime. And this is where we start following the exact sequence of events as laid down in a journal kept by engineer and British Army Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, a guy known for getting things done without waste and without coddling the help.
Patterson was an English country gentleman. I would say probably before he came out to Kenya, he was a gentleman farmer, probably from Berkshire. Nice man, a very nice man, a gentle creature.
He'd been sent by military order to build a bridge over the river Tsavo before the track layers got there. He had researched his task, though he'd perhaps neglected to note that the river was where lions came to hunt and where they went to wash up after dinner. The lush verdancy Patterson raved about at the port where the rail line started did not continue 130 miles inland where, he noted, the land turned dry and scrubby, yet thick. It could also be described as leafless, but with dense undergrowth, with both welcoming and not-so-welcoming native tribes scattered about. So challenging was the terrain and so foolish the attempt, the press dubbed the rail project the Lunatic Express. When Patterson arrived at the inland worksite at dusk that first day, he found 8,000 laborers, sometimes referred to, derogatorily, as coolies, encamped there. Most were native to India, there because the pay was good and the work was constant. Patterson took possession of a doorless, ramshackle shelter made of palms and was up and at 'em early to assess the situation. His job, in a nutshell, was not just to build the bridge, but to complete all of the rail work to and from the bridge for 30 miles in either direction. He immediately sent for more hammers, sledges, drills, and explosives. He then acquired nicer lodging, though nice really would be an overstatement. The camp actually extended more or less horizontally to the railwork for 16 miles, though groups of men bunched up here and there to share rations and shelter. Alongside them in the camp were herds of sheep and cattle that they used for food and donkeys, which they used for hauling. Work was proceeding well after Patterson arrived on the scene. Then 2 men disappeared. Patterson figured they had been killed by their co-workers who had robbed them and hid the bodies to hide the crimes. A junior officer in the British Army, an Indian man named Ungan Singh, was next to go, but he was not so secretively taken. Around midnight, a lion entered his tent, snagged his thigh in its powerful jaws, and commenced dragging him elsewhere as the man struggled to get free. The attack was witnessed by at least one of the 6 other men in the tent, who reported later that Singh had never cried out in distress and that the lion, virtually maneless, was very large. Heel and handprints, blood and drag marks left in the sand, along with paw prints, sufficed for forensic validation. Patterson got the message. Here, the British colonel's tale gets particularly gruesome. I'll just let him tell it. Quote, "We found it an easy matter to follow the route taken by the lion, as he appeared to have stopped several times before beginning his meal. Pools of blood marked these halting places, where he doubtless indulged in the man-eater's habit of licking the skin off so as to get at the fresh blood." End quote. So yeah, a lion was in the vicinity. In fact, 2 lions as 2 pairs of prints were found at the spot where Singh was devoured. And because Singh had been an imposing and highly capable man, a descendant of an ancient class of warriors, no one doubted the animal's ferocity. That night, Patterson thought he'd nip this problem in the bud. He perched high in a tree, armed with a .303 rifle and a 12-bore shotgun. Some of the now terrified laborers shimmied up the tree to join him to wait and watch their new boss in action. Hours later, from across the plains, a roar, then silence. The next day, proof was again abundant that another man had been snatched while sleeping. Early in what would be a long campaign of death, the lions appeared to be honing their craft. They snagged a sleeping man by the shoulder and then, in some confusion, grabbed a bag of rice and hauled it off instead. Another time, a lion went after a man on a donkey who had been selling canned goods around the camp. The lion and the donkey got tangled up, and the cans ended up making a mighty ruckus, and the lion got spooked, leaving the terrified vendor alone. Don't consider these fumbles, however. This was training. These killers were learning when and how and who made the best target. This was not the first anecdote Englishmen would tell about how African lions could learn to be better manhunters. In southwest Uganda, one lion was known to only attack riders on bicycles, as the fall from the bike put victims on the ground for easier work. In that country's Queen Elizabeth National Park, a lioness was known to wait outside a village pub for the chance an inebriated villager would wander outside. She killed nearly a dozen this way, having learned where some people didn't pay much attention as they wobbled their way home. I guess she also learned that drunks weren't very fast. Now, the Tsavo lions were quite unusual because they were 2 males. Actor Michael Douglas, who starred in a movie about the slaughters.
Male lions never work together. They have their individual prides, they fight, they never work together. Some African tribes felt they were not lions, they were spirits that were there to prevent the white man and the railroad from coming across the line. Other people felt that they were evil. That just as there are bad seeds, there are people who are intrinsically evil. These 2 lions were killers.
Killers that can traverse 50 miles an hour, that can leap 12 feet in a single bound. They are patient, stealthy, and work in the dark. They don't drink on the job, but neither do they give up on a good thing. With 8,000 men lining up to be eaten, this pair decided to settle in to dine in earnest. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Ritual. Gonna lower my guard for a minute and just be real. I'm stressed out. I mean, everyone is, so I know I'm not special, but it feels a bit extra to me because I'm working 2 full-time jobs, I'm raising a 10-year-old, I'm running a business, I have to deal with Daisy Egan's tantrums. It's a lot. So for the past several weeks, I've been using Ritual's Stress Relief, and there's been a difference. This product uses first-of-its-kind technology to support the body's natural cortisol response so you can take on the daily juggle. Stress Relief Bio-Series technology is designed to optimize the release of a trio of clinically studied ingredients to help the body manage stress. What are those, you ask? Well, there's Shodan ashwagandha, suntheanines, L-theanine, and Afron saffron. In order, these aim to support normal cortisol levels, provide quick stress relief, and promote a positive mood. The juggle is real. Don't just respond to stress. Get ahead of it with stress relief from Ritual. Get 25% off your first month at ritual.com/COTC. Start Ritual or add stress relief to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/COTC for 25% off. Once Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson knew what kind of killers he was dealing with, he began trying to study them as much as the lions were studying their prey. In truth, Patterson wasn't as quick a researcher as the lions were, but he did figure out pretty quickly that roars frequently announced the killer's arrival. The sound of those roars could be close or far away, but they were an unmistakable harbinger that sent shivers down the workers' spines. It took a little longer for Patterson to realize, though, that the real time to be terrified was when the lions went quiet. In the coming weeks and months, men died, one by one, in terrible ways. This is an actor reading Patterson's description of one such kill in a Great Safaris episode on the Tsavo lions.
One dark night, the familiar terror-stricken cries and screams awoke the camps, and we knew that the demons had returned. The lion burst into the midst of the terrified group, seized an unfortunate wretch amid the cries and shrieks of his companions, and dragged him off through the thick thorn fence. He was joined outside by the second lion, and so daring had the two brutes become that they did not trouble to carry their victim any further away, but devoured him within 30 yards of the tent.
Patterson tried a lot of things to stem the tide. He condensed the size of the lengthy camp so the density of workers increased. He improvised a circle-the-wagons defense, with laborers gathering up the thorny bushes that thrived in the area to build fences around the perimeter of the camp. He then added similarly thorny screens around individual tents. By the way, those bushes are said to be like wrestling with a bale of barbed wire. Some suspect that they're the reason the lions in Tsavo have genetically engineered themselves out of having manes. Some say there are maneless lions elsewhere too, so no, it's not the bushes. Some think it's genetic. Scientists are still working on this. I digressed, apologies. Now back to 1898 and the thorny bushes, which the lions showed they were willing to leap over and, when hauling out a victim, just push through. The gore this must have caused just appalls me because that dragging through would have occurred while the victims were still alive. This is Stephen Hopkins, director of a 1996 movie about the tale, starring the aforementioned Michael Douglas and Val Kilmer.
If you're in that camp every night and these lions are coming and killing everyone, people you know, people you don't know, and leaving dead bodies scattered everywhere every night, you would think that was evil, It's one thing for them to come and eat, but they just seem to go on this rampage, this maddening rampage of death.
The lions got so bold, they sometimes didn't bother with the easy pickings. That'd be those on the exterior perimeter of the encampment, but rather they would wander through the interior to find their victim and wander around it on the way out. The first newspaper reports about the deaths in no way conveyed the terror felt on sight. A Wire report in mid-May of 1898, quote, "Life in the country through which the Uganda Railway is being carried seems to be fairly exciting in some respects. A recent letter from that part of our dominions tells of an incursion of man-eating lions at one of the stations. No fewer than 16 coolies have been carried off and devoured by these beasts within as many days. The lions went into the camp at night and actually took the poor fellows out of the tents. But the advent of the locomotive will soon prove fatal to such leonine pastimes." End quote. I'm not sure I'd characterize 16 gruesome deaths as fairly exciting, but so it goes. At the instruction of Patterson, laborers strung pots together in hopes that the lions would crash into them and be scared away by the noise. They built fires to provide light through the night. They tried using goats as bait, only to find that the lions bypassed them, as well as ignoring the hundreds, even thousands of men similarly sleeping to get to the man they'd somehow selected in the dark to be their latest meal. Oftentimes, that would be at the hospital, where as many as 60 men, injured by the conditions and the heavy equipment, were being treated. The lions could smell the fresh blood that emanated from the facility and knew those inside were most vulnerable. They were not your grandmother's lion. So familiar did the lions become that they were named by those they terrorized. They were fittingly and beautifully named the Ghost and the Darkness, which later would be the title of that Kilmer/Douglas film I referenced. Some men swore they were literal demons, ancient spirits trying to stop the colonization of the land, which frightened the faithful far more than if they were simply man-eating lions. Still, night after night, a very stubborn Patterson parked himself in trees or among some freshly rigged scaffolding to wait to see them, to get a shot at them. But he also had a bridge to build and, as he inched along, water to find and supplies to order and food to distribute, all while calming his workforce, persuading them to stay on the job. He wrote that many of them did the math and figured their odds at 1 in 8,000 weren't so bad after all. I'm pretty sure that math wouldn't have made me stay. That's because the lions weren't predictable. Sometimes there'd be a lull. At another time, 7 victims were taken in 8 days, despite the rigging of traps and alarms. Patterson wrote that the pair had a, quote, uncanny faculty for finding out our plans, end quote. And there was no blueprint for how to eradicate the menace. Ian Allen again.
There had never been an incident like this recorded, and I don't believe there's been one since. I think for the sheer cunning of these 2 predators at the Tsavo Bridge, the fact that they were able to work systematically, attacking a different coolie camp every night, so that Patterson could never outguess them.
One way he tried was by moving the hospitals across the camp from its original location, surrounding it with protection. He then painted the interior of the old hospital with blood. Patterson and a doctor named Brock, both armed, waited nearby when darkness fell. That night, a water carrier in the new hospital was tagged and dragged and eaten, all within 400 yards of camp. They moved the hospital again, late at night. This time, Patterson and the doctor parked a goods wagon nearby, tied a few cattle to it as bait, climbed into the wagon, partially covered but still able to look out at the now abandoned facility. An hour or so passed before the cattle grew nervous, and the colonel thought he'd leave the safety of the wagon to get a better look. Talked out of that, the 2 men peered through the darkness, believing the lion had entered the enclosed space a distance in front of them. They waited, and then one of the lions, who had apparently been doing reconnaissance on the 2 men in the wagon, sprung at them. Both men fired their weapons, and silence. When it was light enough, the men found no evidence that they'd hit the beast, but he'd been very close. Later, when Patterson moved into a more securely built hut, this one had a wooden frame, he found paw prints that showed the large animal had made loops around the hut during the night. He and Brock once again crouched to wait for their nightly visitor, which they knew was nearby because they could hear him breathing. Later, they found he'd been only 15 yards away from where they had spent the night. Patterson grew to believe that the pair were now being very selective. They were not just after his laborers and messing mightily with his project. They were after him. At one point, Patterson even shut down the work on the rail project for 3 months, not informing his superiors of the work stoppage to concentrate on hunting the predators. Still, the Lions won more nights than they lost. Guide Boytron again.
There were very few guns around, and it seemed like wherever the guns were, the lions were somewhere else.
But when the work crews loaded up and moved west to be closer to the river, so did the lions. The months dragged on, and by now, more than 1,000 laborers had left their jobs and gone home. Of those who stayed, no one slept. No one concentrated on work, with Patterson, once a hard taskmaster, letting his laborers off early in the evening to prepare elaborate shields around their sleeping fortresses. Then Patterson launched another plan. Using lumber, tram rails, telegraph wire, and heavy chain, Patterson built 2 boxes. One for the laborers he was going to use as bait. Feel free to grasp here, but he didn't think they'd be in peril because of the wire caging that protected them. And another box for the lion to enter and die in. The idea was that the lion would enter one box, the door would snap shut, and the armed men would shoot him like fish in a barrel. A tent was pitched over it to further deceive, or maybe entice the lions. Nice idea. Then the lions didn't show for weeks. When they did, they must have been pleased to find that many men had decided they were gone for good and had taken to sleeping outside because of the cool night temperatures. The director, Stephen Hopkins, marveled at the pair's cunning, as well as their viciousness.
I love the story where the lions stopped eating the people and just started killing them. They didn't even end up taking a lot of them. They would just come in, kill, and walk away and leave bits of these people all over the camp without even eating them after a while. But they just seemed to go on this rampage, this maddening rampage of death.
Patterson then summoned a district officer and accomplished hunter, a Mr. Whitehead, who arrived a day later than expected because a lion had been attacking the station and waited for the train he was on to arrive. Anyway, Whitehead arrived, heard about Patterson's man-bait booby trap plan, and pitched in to help. Trap set. The men inside the contraption were told to fire as soon as the lion entered and the door behind him slammed shut. And it worked. Kind of. The lion came. The men inside the second box, too frightened to shoot immediately, had to be yelled at to pull their triggers. Meanwhile, the now enraged lion thrashed around wildly, throwing himself against the bars of the cage. Bullets flew from every direction at the lion, who was literally upon them. Inexplicably, one erratic bullet hit the latch which opened the outdoor gate. The frantic prisoner escaped, having never been hit. Talk about unkillable. The next day, the lions were tracked by their roars as British officers and hard laborers both crawled on hands and knees through thorny jungle grass looking for the unfindable. They found nothing. Crimes This Centuries is sponsored by Field of Greens. Have you heard of cancer-fighting foods? The American Cancer Society discovered diets rich in fruits and veggies may actually lower your risk of cancer, which is both great and daunting news to me, someone who's afraid of cancer and who also doesn't get enough fruits and veggies in her diet. If you're like me and have a hard time hitting that 5 servings a day goal, consider adding Field of Greens to your daily health regimen. I do, and I legit love this stuff. All I do is add 1 scoop of Field of Greens to my water, and through that, I get a full serving of vegetables and a full serving of fruit to kick off my day. Each fruit and veggie in Field of Greens was doctor selected for studied health benefits. There's a heart health group, lungs, kidneys, and metabolism groups, even healthy weight. Now, will Field of Greens prevent, treat, or cure cancer? No, that's not what I'm saying, and there's no product or food in the world that can make that claim. But Field of Greens is so powerful that the product promises at your next checkup, your doctor will notice your improved health or you get your money back. I got you 15% off plus free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code COTC. That's promo code COTC at fieldofgreens.com, fieldofgreens.com. John Henry Patterson would never say he hated the lions. Feared them, yes. Determined to kill them, also yes. But he was not their enemy. In his mind, they simply could not go on killing people. Maybe he was just being a stiff, upper-lipped 19th century British military man, but what he felt like was more respect for his foe. In early December 1898, Patterson tracked one of the lions while a team of laborers stood by to bang pots and pans together to distract them, to give the colonel time to shoot. The plan was working. The cat came into view, the banging forced him to turn, and Patterson took aim. But his gun misfired. Stunned, Patterson lowered his rifle, but the lion was still distracted by the banging of pots and pans coming from the laborers. Patterson gathered himself, realized he had ammunition in his other barrel, and when the lion began to take off, he saw him for the first time in all his leonine glory. Patterson shot again. A wounded growl let the colonel know he'd hit him, but he had not stopped him. He was gone. That night, Patterson set himself up in an elevated perch made of poles. Sitting some 12 feet above the earth, he heard a deep sigh. The lion had come looking for him. Ignoring a dead donkey that had been sacrificed for the cause, the lion waited. When the lion made his move, Patterson fired into the inky darkness in the direction of the sound of a lion plunging toward him. The lion let out a piercing roar, then a few groans and a few sighs. When the dawn allowed, Patterson found the huge lion in the nearby jungle, crouching as if to spring. He was dead, all 9 feet 8 inches and 400 pounds of him. It took 8 men to carry him back to camp to show others that at least one of the lions wasn't immortal. This was the ghost. It took 3 weeks to find the second lion, a time period in which no one else on Patterson's crew died, but he and his wife, who had joined him in the wilderness, were kept awake nightly by what he described as, quote, the most awful, evil, mournful wailing and moaning of the second lion. It was mourning the death of his friend, end quote. Maybe the ghost had been the better hunter, and the darkness was just hungry. Or maybe grief transcends species. Patterson clearly thought so. On the night that the second lion succumbed to the sheer, unrelenting cussedness of Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, he was seen by the colonel's sidekick, regrettably referred to as Boy. Boy had been with Patterson through the endless attempts to find the man-eaters. On this night, the colonel had a fever, but Boy woke him. He'd seen the lion, he said. The moon was full. There were no clouds. A goat had been set out to lure the lion, but he showed no interest in the goat. Was it revenge that made him go for Patterson? A suicide wish? An instinct only he could respond to? Whatever the case, he was shot 5 times. When followed, he charged the colonel despite having 2 broken legs and bleeding profusely. Hit again, he rose to fight, and fell, and rose again. He died trying to climb after the man who had shot him. The ordeal was over. The bridge was finished. It's still there today. The man-eating in Southwest Africa, of course, wasn't over. In 1900, most of a railway station's employees perished one by one, thanks to maneless lions. But Africa didn't have a monopoly on pissed-off cats. In 1907, a single Champawat tiger managed to kill 200 people in Nepal before being driven into North India, where she continued to kill. Her death toll ended at 436. At about the same time, the leopard of Panar reportedly killed 400 in northern India. Back in Tsavo, when the greatest lion hunt of all time was over, the colonel made their coats into rugs before selling them, much the worse for wear, to the Field Museum in Chicago for $2,500 a coat. Displayed on and off during the 20th century, they did not seem to evoke their previous grandeur, diminished in size because of the improper curation of their hides. Their story then waited for science to catch up. And here's where things get complicated. Some scientists now say, having done isotopic analysis on the Tsavo man-eater's teeth, that the number of men they killed might be more like 24. Other scientists say maybe their death total was more like 300. It might be that the testing lowballed the number of victims because the Indians that the lions ate were, wait for it, vegetarians. I'm not going to enter this fray, but it is interesting that science has now determined that the darkness, the smaller lion, had severe dental disease, including a broken canine tooth, 3 lost incisors, and an abscess, all of which may have inhibited his ability to kill prey, but not to eat it. Our hides, after all, aren't quite as tough as, say, that of an elephant. Still, why did these two prefer people? Dr. Larissa DeSantis of Vanderbilt University has looked long and hard at these two animals' teeth. She said there's little evidence that they were starved for food or for choices, as they also ate gazelle, zebra, and water buffalo. DeSantis told Earth Touch News Network, quote, "We tend to not like to think of ourselves as being on the menu for big cats, but we are and have been for a long time. While man-eating isn't all that common, it's not that rare either," end quote. Ian Allen, the longtime Tsavo safari guide, explained why he thinks these lions may have had a taste for human flesh.
The problem with the man-eaters really goes back a long way before the British started building their railway. You see, the only people that really crossed Tsavo in the old days were the Arab slave trade caravans. And they would set tribe against tribe, and then they would take the prisoners and they would march them all the way down to the coast to sell them in the slave markets in Mombasa. There would be a lot of men that were going to make no money in the markets at all. They would either be dying or dead, or they would be in such poor condition. The Arabs would just toss them out into the bush. The lions of Tsavo would find these dying or dead bodies just stumbling around in the bush, and they would kill them and they would eat them. So they developed a very good sense of human flesh.
The red-sanded, sometimes dense, sometimes not, jungle crossed by the British and Lieutenant Colonel Patterson and his crew is now firmly placed within Tsavo National Park, one of the world's largest game preserves. To the east lies the longest lava ridge in the world, the Yada Escarpment. To the west, the Chulu Hills can be seen rising up to 7,000 feet. Trains still make use of that bridge that Patterson and his laborers built so long ago. The lions are still there too. Their number has dramatically increased since 1990. At last count, there were 675 lions in the park. Some remain maneless, but not all. Why that's the case was the subject of the Serengeti Lion Project in late 1990. Project manager Peyton West told author Philip Caputo in his 2002 book, The Ghosts of Tsavo, that, quote, "Scientists don't want to demystify nature, we just want to clarify what the real mysteries are," end quote. And yet, study or no study, the manelessness remains a mystery. You can see the ghost in the darkness today, better preserved by taxidermy now, and posed together in an African diorama in the Rice Gallery of the Field Museum. It's estimated that between 70 and 200 people are still killed annually by lions, but that assumes all such deaths are reported. Tsavo safari guides still warn tourists of the dangers they present. Usually this means telling them the true story I just told about what happened in Tsavo in 1898. The word Tsavo, the guides then remind, translates to place of slaughter. So they urge tourists, be safe, don't travel alone, especially at night. Oh, and bring a gun. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read The Man-Eaters of Tsavo by Lieutenant Colonel J.H. Patterson, as well as Ghosts of Tsavo, Stalking the Mystery Lions of East Africa by Philip Caputo. She watched numerous documentaries, most specifically The Man-Eaters of Tsavo and the full story of the man-eating lions of Tsavo. And she treated herself to the fictionalized version of this story, the 1996 The Ghost and the Darkness, starring Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Schoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're at centuriespod, and check out our Crimes of the Centuries podcast Facebook page.